Alrighty, back in the old setting here. Let's take a look at chapter 6 of the BCS manual. Cognitive behavioral therapy. So, cognitive behavioral therapy, or more commonly referred to as CBT, is a form of sort of therapy, I guess, or just a realm of psychology that is focused on people's thoughts and their emotions and their behaviors and how those things often affect one another. So the idea here is that, by analyzing and understanding our thoughts, by analyzing and understanding like our patterns and things like that, we can we can develop specific interventions that will focus on like turning those thoughts into something a little bit more constructive, turning those feelings into something maybe a little bit more positive. And so it can be used to not only improve our thoughts and feelings, but when those things are sort of like free and clear, it also affects our behaviors. I know that I have the habit whenever I get a little grumpy, whenever I get a little grumpy, I get a little stuck being grumpy, and I have a hard time kind of getting out of it sometimes. I always think of this interview that I saw with Harrison Ford. He was on like Conan. He was on Conan O'Brien's show, and Conan O'Brien's like sitting there, and Harrison Ford just kind of sits down in the chair. He's an old man at this point. He's just kind of like, meh. And Conan's like, hey, it's really nice to have you. I was a little intimidated to have you on the show because, you have a little bit of a reputation of, pardon me for saying, but sometimes being a little grumpy. Harrison Ford just goes, that's bullcrap, and just says it in the grumpiest way possible. And it's a really like funny bit, but sometimes I feel like I can get stuck like that. And so whenever I feel that way, I try to be aware of it and, sort of change my perspective and be a little more constructive with my thoughts and feelings. And, whenever I do that, like my behaviors also are positively impacted. I'm much more productive. I feel better. I do better, really good stuff. So I do, obviously, you guys know how much I love to kind of start off with an intro video. Let's see here. Therapy, and there's the crash course. I don't know why I didn't type crash course. It's on there. This is kind of an interesting one though, because this is the one with the kid. That's also psychotherapy. I'm not watching psychotherapy. That one sucks. Oh, where is it? It's the next episode after this one. The one we watched yesterday, the Bobo beatdown. There it is. Okay. Play that and share the sound and all that. So this is kind of a fun perspective on like thoughts and stuff. And this is sort of where we're seeing things in the realm of psychology. We're spending more time kind of understanding that like our thoughts are, there's something that sort of comes in and disappears. What's up, Dion? Just in time. How you doing?
I'm good.
Okay, good to see you. All right, so here is a good one for you guys.
1961. It's 1961. You're wandering around Stanford University looking for a sandwich or something when you happen to walk by a particular room in a particular lab and see something a little unnerving. Namely, you find a woman punching an inflatable clown named Bobo in the neck. Over and over in its neck. This was the lab of legendary psychologist Albert Bandura, and in 1961 he was studying one of the most important phenomena in psychology. See, while that woman was throttling that big inflatable clown, there was a child watching her, and after about 10 minutes of observing this clown-beating display, the kid was taken to a room full of fun toys, which were soon taken away, and then the frustrated kid was left alone with Bobo, and Bandura watched what happened. And yeah, what happened was kind of scary. Kids who watched the woman beating the clown were much more likely.
Whoops.
to mimic her aggression, kicking, punching, throwing, even attempting to maul Bobo with a hammer. But other children who saw an adult playing nicely with a doll or just ignoring it didn't respond the same way in their frustration. Bandura's results may seem predictable now, but in those days they challenged the dominant behaviorist views that we talked about last week. The views that learning is solely about conditioning and association, rewards and punishments. Bandura's research focused on how learning can occur through observing and imitating someone else's behavior. And if that seems obvious to you, you have Bandura to thank for that. His research hastened the evolution of 20th century experimental psychology from pure behaviorism into what we now know as social cognitive learning. While it was closely related to behaviorism, the social cognitive models added profoundly new dimensions to what Skinner and Watson and Pavlov had observed in our feathered and furry friends. In other words, it showed us that just as there's more than one way to beat up a clown, there's more than one way to learn. Last week we talked about the differences between classical and operant conditioning in associative learning, the kind of learning that comes from connecting different events and stimuli. In classical conditioning, this means associating a stimulus with some kind of involuntary response, the whole dog slobbering at the sound of a bell phenomenon, whereas operant conditioning makes associations between stimulus and a voluntary behavior, like the rat pressing a lever to get delicious snacks or jumping out of a cage to avoid an electric shock. And that's all well and good, but if learning is the process of acquiring and retaining new behavior and information, then Bandura's experiments showed us that conditioning with external rewards, punishment, or other stimuli isn't the only way to do it. It's hard to deny that pretty much all animals are capable of learning certain things by association, but critics of behaviorists like Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner had a problem with their assertions that when it came to learning, it didn't matter much whether you're training rats, pigeons, or people. It's all the same, because lots of research has demonstrated that an animal's capacity for conditioning is actually limited by its biology. Consider this scenario. Say, I get a raging case of food poisoning after eating my head weight in raw oysters with my friend Bernice. I'm probably not going to want to touch oysters again for a long time because I associate their smell and taste with the smell and taste that they made when they were coming back out. That's what I'm trying to say. But that doesn't mean that the sight of Bernice or the sound of the sea shanties that they were playing at the restaurant would make me barf, because humans are, by our very nature, more taste-averse than we are sight or sound-averse. On the other hand, sight-oriented animals like birds may be biologically predisposed to avoid tainted food by sight, since that's how they hunt and forage. And presumably they go to restaurants that play better music. Anyway, all this tells us that species can more easily learn associations that help them thrive or survive, and that not all associations are learned equally. It's a lot easier to teach a pigeon to peck an X on the ground to obtain a food reward than it is to get it to flap its wings to get that same reward, because pecking is a natural foraging behavior for a pigeon. In the same way, it would be much harder for the bird to learn to peck that X to avoid a shock rather than to flap its wings to avoid the shock, because flying away from danger is what pigeons naturally do. Learned associations are even more complicated in humans, of course, because what we learn doesn't only influence our behavior, it also shapes our attitudes. Our cognition, that is, our thoughts, perspectives, and expectations, is important for learning, as is our social context, as Bandura figured out. So Pavlov-style conditioning experiments that ignore those social cognitive elements can really run into trouble. For example, someone under treatment for an alcohol addiction may be given booze laced with a nauseating drug. According to the pure classical conditioning model, that person would then equate booze with feeling nasty. But the brain can override this association if it's aware that the added drug and not the alcohol is the thing that's causing the illness. Sometimes we can think our way out of intended associations. And by the same token, a person's social context, like their friends, family traditions, or life stressors, can reinforce something like alcohol consumption more than the nauseating pill could ever punish it. Plus, we also do a lot of latent learning, like without even knowing it. Have you ever been walking around a new city, someone stops you to ask for directions, and you surprise yourself by actually being able to tell that tourist how to get to the park? That's because we're constantly developing cognitive maps or mental representations of our surroundings without explicitly telling ourselves to do it. We've all seen the experiments with rats and mazes. Well, those show us that even rats develop these cognitive maps, figuring out how to get around even if there's no reward at the end. And days later, when they finally do get food at the end of the maze, they quickly demonstrate all that earlier latent learning by scuttling through the maze as fast or faster than rats that had been rewarded all along. So learning isn't just about associating a response with a consequence. There's thinking happening too. And this kind of thinking is also a big part of observational learning, which is basically learning learning by watching other people or being influenced by them in other ways. Because you don't need direct experience to learn. You can just pick stuff up through modeling. Not like modeling on the catwalk, I just mean observing and imitating specific behaviors. Rats, crows, pigeons, primates, and other animals learn through imitation. Chimps learn how to use sticks to fish ants out of a nest this way. One study found that rhesus macaques were usually slow to make up after a fight, unless they grew up watching more forgiving older macaques, in which case they tended to make up more quickly. Of course, we humans learn a lot from modeling. I mean, most of our popular culture is based on it. New slang, skinny jeans, foodie trends, pixie cuts, they're all racing around the globe through observation and imitation. So it makes a lot of sense that social observation shapes behavior, especially in children. Which brings us back to Bobo. Again, the fact that we learn by imitating even when we don't mean to seems pretty intuitive, but until Bandura's famous experiment, it hadn't been studied in a scientific way. I mean, these kids started abusing Bobo not just with little toddler punches, but with hostile language, and even using things like toy guns that they'd previously had no interest in, and all because they saw aggressive modeling in action. And since Bandura's time, technology has allowed us to peer even deeper into this dynamic. Neuroimaging in humans, for instance, has shown that when an individual watches someone else, especially someone whom they relate to, receive an award or score a goal or something, their own brain's reward systems light up vicariously. Italian researchers found this out pretty much by accident in the early 1990s. They were studying signals from key regions in a lab monkey's brain that were associated with planning and doing. Their brain monitoring device buzzed softly when the monkey did something like pick up a piece of fruit and eat it. But one hot day, a researcher came back from lunch licking an ice cream cone and suddenly heard the animal's brain monitor buzz. The monkey was watching him, and his brain worked as if he was actually doing the licking. Many scientists suspect that this is the work of a previously unknown type of brain cell called mirror neurons, which fire when a subject both performs an action and when they observe someone else doing it. Mirror neuron research is still relatively new, and we're still figuring them out, but combined with Bandura's earlier work, it's revealing a strong connection between observation, imitation, and learning. So the takeaway here is models are important, and not just Giselle and Antonio Sabato Jr. You can, if you want, observe and imitate them. I'm just saying that observational social learning starts really early, and parental figures are powerful role models. Positive, supportive, and loving models usually prompt similar behavior in others, just as negative, aggressive modeling can spark antisocial effects. And as we'll talk about later, what we see and feel and learn as children is not easily displaced when we're adults. Literary giant George Bernard Shaw wrote, "Imitation is not just the sincerest form of flattery, it's the sincerest form of learning." And British statesman Lord Chesterfield once said, "We are, in truth, more than half what we are by imitation." Even if these ideas were only half true, they'd still be a powerful lesson on who you choose to spend your time with and how you choose to act. If you learned anything by watching me today, hopefully it involved the limitations of classical and operant conditioning, the basics of cognitive, observational, and social learning, a look at mirror neurons, and how to beat up a Bobo doll. Thanks for watching, especially to all of our Subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course, get a special decal, or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to Subbable.com. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiBastino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins, and the script supervisor is Michael Aranda, who is also our sound designer, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Okay, so that's kind of a fun perspective, because you'll notice the one thing that he kept saying in that video, one of the things he kept saying in that video, is how cognitive behavioral therapy kind of challenges classical behavior therapy. So I love behavior therapy. It's probably one of my favorite techniques, like I said, for changing habits. But like if we think that that is the only thing that makes up our personality and thoughts and actions and stuff, that's a pretty limited view, you know. And so cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, sort of challenges that by looking at personality and how personality is sort of developed a lot of times through like modeling, right? We sort of are exposed to certain things, and then we kind of get used to those things being the norm. One of the reasons I think that this is important to realize in a lot of people is, like, you know, I have had people say, it's like, oh, you know, my whole family struggles with our weight. Everyone is really heavy. and so like weight loss, I think it's just in my genetics, right? And it's like, for the record, like I believe that there is some genetic component here, absolutely. Like everybody's metabolism is going to sort of run at a different rate. If you have a slow thyroid, your metabolism will run slower, right? We know that that is true, but I also think that, like, perspective wise, if you're also taking the time to step back and simply look at the habits, your parents, you're going to learn your habits from your parents. And if those habits include things like always finish your plate. Anybody in here come from like a clean plate family? Anybody like in here, like their parents, like that was like a big deal? Like you weren't allowed to leave any food on your plate until were allowed to leave the table?
That happened to me until one very unfortunate incident. My mom used to make us finish everything on the plate,
Uh-huh.
and I was having a bowl of albondigas, and I ate the last meatballs. I ate the last meatball, and I refilled my plate.
Oh, that's not good.
Never again was I asked to finish my plate.
Hey,
Yeah.
your parents learned something that day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really common one. You hear that all the time, like don't do, always clean up your plate, right? And so like if you learned that habit from your folks and they learned it from their folks, and we know that that's just not a very, like, nutritionally, that's not always the best way to consume food. Like it can lead to overeating a lot of times because you go to a restaurant and you don't really know what the portion sizes are going to be, or you're just maybe you weren't as physically active that day, and so all your hunger dials are sort of turned back a little bit. You're just not feeling all that hungry. That makes sense. You're not feeling hungry because maybe you weren't as physically active. If it's been a pretty gentle day on the couch, then your body knows that it doesn't need as many calories, and so everything's kind of dialed back. But then if you have this like opposite habit, these sort of learn through association, to consume these extra calories, no matter how you're feeling, it starts to sort of paint a picture of like one of the reasons why obesity and things like that are such a struggle, why some people love exercise and why others don't. It's funny, we went to, I just got back from Hawaii, but talking about like perspective and stuff, people always ask like, oh, it's beautiful. And like, while I was there, guys, it was very beautiful, no doubt about it. But I will say, like, as somebody who grew up in the Northwest around like pine trees and like very different weather, my idea of like what natural nature beauty is a little bit different than like the tropical stuff, and so like there are definitely times where I was like, oh, this is beautiful. But like I got a pretty nice stream outside my backyard, like when I was growing up as a kid, like I had this like weird kind of competitive almost idea in my head, right? It's like I was rooting for the home team in a way. And that's like a learned association, like that's something that like, I personally, like I went to Joshua Tree to go camping one time years ago, and I remember like kind of being just kind of keeping quiet because everyone was like, it's so beautiful, and I was like, this is just like a desert. And it didn't land for me. Don't get me wrong, I do think it's beautiful out there and in its specific way, but that doesn't necessarily like call to me. That's my specific personality. That's not biology, right? That's not like a set of two, like that is just something I could definitely learn to appreciate, over time, like if I'm like fair and objective about things, right? But we're not always like that. No, we're not like that naturally. Sometimes we sort of naturally kind of cling to the things that we kind of saw and grew up around. So cognitive behavioral therapy is going to look to understand a little bit about our personality, and understanding that like personality a lot of times is very inherited through what you are exposed to, right? So here's one other thing I will say. This is going to break personality down into 5 key traits. This is the ocean model for personalities. And so this is the big 5 personality test. Now, personally, and this is this is an opinion that I have. I do not love personality tests. I think that personality tests aren't necessarily inaccurate, but I do think that sometimes they can be used to excuse bad behaviors, where someone goes, it's like, oh, I'm a Sagittarius. That's why I do this. And it's like, maybe you're just rude, like, I don't know anything about Sagittariuses or whether or not they're rude. I'm certainly not all of them, like somebody in this call must be, but like, I do think that sometimes personality tests can kind of, be used to excuse certain behaviors. But I do like the Big Five personality test because it is looking at sort of how we respond to things naturally, rather than just like a flat, oh, your personality is like this, you're going to do these things. I think that this is more before that. It's like looking at like how you sort of respond to things rather than like why you respond to them. So I do like this one a little bit better, but from my own perspective, and maybe this is just me being a skeptic, I would say take the personality stuff with a little bit of a grain of salt. So your personality is, personality does describe how individuals sort of behave in specific situations, right? And so the Big Five is designed to look at common personalities in 5 key dimensions. Now, one of the other limitations to personality tests is also there's way more than 5 types of people out in the world. If you've ever taken like the Myers-Briggs test, that's another really popular one. Anybody in here know of Myers-Briggs? It's the thing that makes you, they say you're an AJPQ or an ENRF. It's like they break your personality down into these 4
God,
categories. Yeah.
don't they also have like a color test?
Yeah. Oh God, I don't know what that one's called. My roommate really likes that one.
But
Yes,
it's similar to the alphabet one, right?
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: these things got really popular. Like Myers-Briggs were like, I think it was a mother and a daughter actually, or maybe sisters or something. But they're the ones who came up with it, and it's great. It honestly, it has, it does give you insight into someone's personality. But they like marketed it towards like corporate America. And so Myers-Briggs got super popular as a personality test. And companies started noticing that like when they hired specific types of personalities for specific types of jobs, they like did better and those employees were more productive. Like if you assign somebody who's very technical brained to like a very technical job versus somebody who's a little more creative brained to like a very creative job, you're going to get better results. And so Myers-Briggs was like all about this, but I think that like anything else in the world, it has been sort of twisted over the years, and now people are like, they use it to kind of explain their behaviors, like, oh, I just have an Italian temper, and it's like, maybe you're just not nice, like, like that's me. Like I definitely like lose my temper sometimes, like, but like that's my fault, like I am the one, I need to you gotta take responsibility for that. And I try to instill that in my clients all the time. My clients will try to be like, oh, well, I come from this type of thing. It's like, great. Well, you've got the awareness. That's like step 1. Now, we need to just like change our habits a little bit, right? So take this with a grain of salt, but here's the Big Five personality. And by the way, if you guys want to do this, it's pretty easy to find this test online. It's actually in your books. You can give yourself a little quiz and figure out like what your Big Five personality is. But the first one, and it's going to stand for ocean, right? OCEAN. That's the acronym for the Big Five. Friggin' psychology, we love acronyms. But the first one is going to be openness to experiences, right? And so people who tend to be a little bit more open are people who tend to be very inventive and tend to be very curious, rather than the type of people who tend to be very cautious and very consistent, right? My mom is a very consistent person. She likes to do things kind of the same way. She likes to be on a routine. I definitely get parts of that from her. I like to kind of wake up at the same time every day rather than randomly. I find that that's way easier. I like to wear the same thing every day because it's easy and consistent. I don't have to put any effort into thinking about it. But at the same time, like there are certain areas that I tend to be very inventive and kind of curious in, where I'll try to do something one way and then be like, what would happen if I tried it this way, right? That tends to be a little bit. So again, personalities are definitely going to be a blend of these things, but that's sort of the openness one, right? In some ways I can be very sort of closed to experiences, and other times like very open. Conscientiousness, this is probably the biggest determining factor. In my opinion, this is the entire reason NASM is even taking the time to talk about this. If you delete all of this information about personality tests from your brains today, I personally, I actually don't blame you, but keep this one. This is the whole reason we're actually talking about this. But conscientiousness, right? Conscientious people tend to be the type of people who are very organized and very efficient, rather than people who tend to be very easygoing or careless. And so people who have high levels of conscientiousness have been recorded as struggling less with like their body weight, body composition, and health, more than people who tend to be a little bit more easygoing. Not that that's saying like you need to be super organized and you can't be easygoing in your life and still be healthy. That would be an insane thing to assume. But the people who tend to be like a little bit more aware, of sort of what's coming into their bodies or like what's going out in terms of like physical activity. People who have like a little bit more awareness of that are people who tend to struggle less in the realm of like diet, health, and exercise, right? This is one of the reasons why food journaling is such a super, super, super powerful tool for so many people, is because it simply develops a little bit of conscientiousness. If you are not the most conscientious person naturally, like if you're like, hey, what's the plan today? And you're like, I don't know, we're just gonna go have some fun, right? That's great, and we love that. But if that style of personality is the same way that you approach like diet and exercise, you might walk into the gym without a plan. He's like, what should I do today? It's like, should I do the shoulder press? Should I do like shoulders? Should I do like the leg press? Maybe I can go do some free weights, maybe she's some cardio. And all of a sudden you're like, poof, I gotta go, like, and then it's like you did nothing, that's that can sometimes happen with a lack of conscientiousness, right? Or like you're sitting there talking to a friend, it's like, how's the gym journey going? It's like, it's going really well, I go all the time. And then like you look back at that person like actually checking in and they're going like 2.5 times per week, right? They're scheduled to go 3 times per week, but they just miss a session pretty consistently, right? So you can find patterns a lot of times when you tend to develop your conscientiousness, and that's what we want to do. We want to develop that conscientiousness. I have a really bad habit that drives our HR guy crazy of forgetting to clock in and clock out. I have been like this my whole life, and it is I don't know what it is. I literally have like 4 alarms on my phone that go off every day. And those alarms are like clock in, clock out, and then the evening session, clock in, clock out, because I have like this much conscientiousness when it comes to remembering to freaking clock in, and it drives my boss crazy. um and it guess fun fact, it drove my last boss crazy, and it drove the one before that crazy. I think a lot of that actually comes from working as a trainer for years and years and years. You're a trainer, you don't clock in, you redeem your sessions. So I'm really good at that. Like, I'm really good at taking someone down to the desk at the end of a session and clicking redeemed. But remembering to clock in at the beginning of a shift is just something I have no conscientiousness in. So I need to put tools in place to help that, and I'm still very bad at it. So that's conscientiousness. We've also got extroversion. Extroversion tends to be people who are very tends to be people who are very outgoing and energetic, rather than people who tend to be a little bit more solitary or maybe a little bit more reserved, right? I think this is the difference between personal trainers and group exercise instructors. Group exercise instructors are always like, let's go, like they're really outgoing. They love being in a crowd. They're super energetic, right? Versus like a personal trainer is like, hi, like, hey, let's build a one-on-one connection. Let's get you working out. But even then, personal trainers tend to be a little bit outgoing. You gotta be able to have a conversation with a stranger and, be like, hey, like, I'm the expert here. Let me tell you what's going on. But you'll see this in your client. If you have a client who tends to be very like positive about things, and really seek the company of others, you can keep your client exercising and engaging in things through like the use of like social constructs, right? If you get them involved in a group exercise class, they're going to be like, that's going to be like lightning in a bottle for them, versus somebody else who's maybe not so much into that. In that case, maybe we train that person in a little bit more of a private setting. I remember making an assumption, really, this is actually very early in my career, and I didn't know much about personality at the time. But I remember training this woman who was an actress. She was like a very well-known actress who was doing very well on daytime television. She was a soap opera star. And I remember thinking like, oh, this girl is, she's going to really enjoy like a big like social setting, is the assumption that my 20-year-old brain made. And turns out like she did not like that at all. Like she liked a very reserved, very private setting in the gym. And so like honestly, like after she got like a lot of anxiety being in like a large crowd, like working out. And so I was like, okay, so then instead we kind of just like, I would build like a little circuit for her with pretty much just dumbbells in like this corner of the gym that was like really empty, that nobody ever kind of went towards because the gym just had this weird empty corner. And that made all the difference for her. That made it a lot more approachable. If any of you guys remember me telling you the story about how there was a school bus that like burnt up on the 101 freeway while I was training one of my clients, and like a bunch of kids were just like stranded on the 101, and this other trainer and I like tore the fence down to like get them off the highway. That was during her session. That's if anybody remembers that weird story at an LA Fitness. So yeah, so that's extroversion. So we do want to pay attention. You got a client who's a little bit more extroverted, great, let's get them into a group setting. You get a client who tends to be a little bit more like reserved, that's great as well. We're going to focus on more of a one-on-one connection. Agreeableness is tend to be people who tend to be a little bit more friendly, a little bit more compassionate, rather than people who tend to be a little bit more analytical or maybe detached. This is somebody who, the difference here, the way I understand this is the difference between somebody who leads with their brain versus somebody who leads with their heart. Other way around, actually, I should have said that. Somebody who leads with their heart rather than with their brain. And so this is somebody who also tends to be a little bit more like friendly and compassionate towards like information they receive. When you're working with a client who tends to have like, if you notice they have a really high level of agreeableness, honestly, and this is going to sound terrible, this is going to sound in a way that's not great, but like they'll kind of believe anything you say. Which is, you shouldn't be saying anything that's not true. But it's great. Like if you recognize that in your client, you probably don't have to spend too much time like explaining what the benefits of why you're doing what you're doing, because they probably just trust you. You probably have a really high level of rapport with this person really quickly. Now, if you notice that your client has a little bit of a low level of agreeableness, like while you're talking to them, that tends to be people who tend to be a little bit more detached and a little bit more analytical towards things. That's okay. That just means that like when you're explaining information, one of the like things that works really well with somebody with like low agreeableness is to highlight research behind like things that have happened. I love that. I think that's great, right? And so if you give them like where there's like, hey, this happened and they did things this way, and it's like that explains like why it is the way it is. They go, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense, you know. And so that's the kind of thing that sort of speaks to that type of person. So if you've got somebody who tends to be a little bit more analytical, giving them interesting examples, giving them data really of like whatever concept it is you're trying to teach them is a super powerful tool. And then we have neuroticism. It's sort of our last aspect of personality here. People who tend to be a little bit more neurotic, or people who tend to be very sensitive, they tend to be very nervous, rather than people who tend to be very confident and very secure. I definitely made the assumption with my client I was talking about earlier that she was going to be very confident because, you know, she's on TV in front of millions of people. Turns out not so much. She had major confidence issues. And so that's one of the reasons why she wanted to train in a private area, you know, and it would literally like, I mean, it would bring her to tears just to think about like being, you know, working out because she just wasn't, you know, happy. And there was some other stuff going on as well that we had to sort of work through over the years. But like, you know, that's yeah, that's a level of like neuroticism, right? It's like somebody who tends to be a little bit more sensitive, right? If that's the case, we want to make sure that we have a lot of empathy and we want to communicate with this person in a very caring, compassionate way versus somebody who tends to be like a little bit more confident and a little bit more secure. That may not be something that we have to spend a lot of time like emphasizing because they're going to be confident either way. So like I said, I think that, you know, if you want to do the big 5 personality test, I think it's kind of fun. You can kind of learn a little bit about yourself. I think there it is. I will attach this to tonight's email. It's a little quiz. I actually made this little handout here. And then I put a little spider chart in there if you want to like do that. This basically is just like a little quiz. All of the questions are in your book. Or in your book, in the chapter that I'm going to email you later. But they're not all on like one little bit like worksheet. So if you want to know about your own personality and stuff, you're just going to ask yourself these 10 questions. It's very simple. That's one of the benefits to the ocean approach instead of like, yeah, Arlene, you were talking about the colors thing, or I was talking about Myers-Briggs. Those tests are massive. You know, they're huge, you know. But like you can kind of use this very, very, very quickly, and you can just kind of mark where you land. You know, like if it were me, I see myself as open to new experiences. I'd say that I strongly agree with that. I put like the 7 because I love novelty. I love new experiences. Unconventional and creative. I think I can be creative sometimes, but not like super intensely. So I'd put that as a 4 for myself. And so now I've got like a total of 11. That's going to be divided by 2. That averages out to 5.5. So I'd mark 5.5 on the open here. But if I go down to conscientiousness, I tend to be like well organized, careful, and responsible. Yeah, I'll give that like a 5 personally. Dependable and self-discipline, I'll give that like a 6. You know, so now again, like another 5.5. So I'll put that like right in the middle there. So I'd work my way around the spider chart and just see what my personality looks like a little bit. You guys can do that. I'll put that handout in the email today if you're curious about it. But yeah, so you can receive a really high score. By the way, none of these are like you are this or that, right? That's not what this is. You know, you can have a high score in multiple areas, but the big one we're paying attention to, guys, and they've tracked this objectively, like with numbers and stuff, is that conscientiousness is really the big one that we're kind of paying attention to. People who have a low conscientiousness, a low awareness score, often have a high BMI, and they've actually tracked this. If you read your book, you'll read all about this. They've actually tracked directly. You know, if your conscientiousness score is this, then the BMI tends to be between here and here. If it's this, it's between here and here, and it's crazy how numerical they got with it. So that's one of the reasons we kind of look at this, right? We know that low conscientiousness may require more close monitoring on our part, more checking in with our client and stuff. And so self-monitoring and planning are really helpful tools to sort of increase that conscientiousness. So that is sort of where we have the big 5 personality, right? It helps us understand, you know, when we look at like cognitive behavioral therapy, right? CBT. The idea here is that we are trying to understand how our clients feel, how they behave, And then we can know sort of like what tools to sort of apply, like what's going to speak most strongly to that person. If you have somebody who's like really, leads with their heart, really creative type, who's a little bit less analytical, then when you are trying to, speak to that person, you want to like sort of appeal to their emotions, right? Rather than appealing to like the data, right? You give my mom data, she just doesn't respond to it, but if you tell her like the effect that it would have on like another person, that is the type of thing that like speaks to her really, really strongly. Everybody's gonna be a little bit different there. But the big one we're paying attention to, like I said, is conscientiousness. Any questions or comments so far? How's everybody doing? Checking in with you fellas and checking in with, well, lady and fellas. Arlene, I've been missing you. It's been it's like you and Alyssa are the only gals we got.
This job schedule has been killing me.
Don't love that.
But I do have a comment about this. So, I mean, they do kind of like go through your personality, and it kind of doesn't touch on like addictive personalities. Do you think there's such a thing as an addictive personality aside from this stuff?
I do. I think it can be, I think that is also very biologic personally. Then again, I tend to be the very analytical type. But yeah, I think addictive personalities are very much like a type as well. It often comes through, if you look at like how our neurons work, we reinforce our habits slowly over time. We're going to see a little bit of this actually tomorrow when we get into imagery. I will actually talk a little bit more about like addiction tomorrow, even though we're talking about like using visualization and imagery. It's not really used to deal with addiction, right? But I think that the two are actually very tied together, because whenever you are exposed to something, one of the things that makes our thoughts, right, is the order in which our neurons fire. So like the difference between like salty and sweet is traveling from neuron, A to B to C to D to E, right? And then something tastes salty instead, that's traveling from B to A to G to Y to X. And because it traveled through different neurons, one thing tastes one way and one thing tastes the other,
Mm-hmm.
The more, let's say, like the difference between a bicep curl and a tricep extension, right, is the order at which your neurons fire. So now let's say, we remember like how neurons fire, right? Let's go back to biology, guys. We'll go back to PFT 118 really quickly. We remember that it's an electrochemical signal, right? We move the sodium and potassium that runs electricity down the neuron. So it, electricity literally burns things, right? It makes a physical change, which is why when you do something over and over and over again, your brain eventually finds the most efficient path. It's like, oh, I don't have to go from A to B. I can skip A. I can go straight to C. And so your brain finds this neural pathway that's much more efficient. And then eventually, once it finds sort of the most efficient path, it starts burning it in. And that way it can travel faster and faster and faster. And that's why practice is so effective. When you do things over and over again, you expose it, right? So now let's remember how we talked a little about the endocrine system, right? We have all these glands, we have all these hormones, right? Our neurons tell us to kind of spit out these neurotransmitters and these like hormones sometimes, and they bond to like specific parts of our body that make us feel or act a certain way, right? So if you are reinforcing the neurons that go to a specific gland or something like that, that gland gets better at squeezing and secreting more stuff, which is one of the reasons why when you get stressed, it can actually change your brain permanently. You get better at getting stressed. And addiction is very, very similar. You reinforce the same habit over and over and over again, your brain gets used to using those neurons. Now, because neurons are used for multiple things, neuron B might be used for salty and sweet, just depending on like how it gets used. Now you start to understand how there's sort of an entanglement here, right? You're like, I'm trying to quit this bad habit that I don't like anymore. And then you do something that's totally unrelated to that habit, but you fired that neuron. your brain is biologically very used to doing in that order. So then you start to feel this like, you start to feel this like tingling in the back of your brain where you're like, man, I could really go for a cigarette, out of nowhere, right? Or I could really, what would go really well with this is like potato chips, like that's sort of where addiction comes from. And some people are more susceptible to that for sure than others are. I think that also can be sort of a personality thing. I think that like when if you are continually sort of reinforcing this, I think it's biologic, sometimes in nature. But like, I think it's also sort of a learned habit as well. Does that make sense? Explain that the way I want to.
No, it does make sense. But I was just thinking, like, I mean, I have friends that have kind of like tried to replace a bad habit with a good habit, and they get really addicted to working out, which is a good thing because I mean, I myself have an addictive personality, and I try to choose good things to get addicted to rather than bad things,
That's really
just
funny.
because I know that of myself, you know?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. If you take a look right here at our next note, that is what we're going to talk about right now. That is literally the perfect segue. We call that in the NASM world a healthy obsession. Obsession tends to kind of freak people out when we use that term because a lot of times like, oh, they're obsessed. It's usually to describe some, a little bit more of like an addicted person, but obsessions are just things that we sort of we're preoccupied with, and so yeah, if we can create healthy obsessions, this is a preoccupation with executing target behaviors, like last year, and I'm still like this, but last year I was obsessed with like saving money and stuff, and it was because like the stock market was doing really well and I was like easily like able to save money and this and that, and it was great, and now now it's like kind of a struggle because economically, obviously if we go really high, we're going to balance that out by kind of going back down low. Now I'm a little bit less motivated to check every day, but I used to check my investment accounts like every morning, and it was like the first thing I would do when I'd get on the computer. I had sort of I would consider that sort of a healthy obsession. It wasn't interfering with my day. It was just something that was sort of setting me up to do the things I want to. Right now, I do think that there can be sort of unhealthy behaviors associated with healthy obsessions. I think that like, being obsessed with being in really good shape and exercising in a very positive way. Again, obsessed, the way we use it in the day-to-day language is often not really what we're describing here. I mean, like, if you're obsessed with exercise, that sounds honestly kind of bad, but it really is a sort of a positive thing, right? It sounds a little more possessive than it actually is, but that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I do mean it from a healthy standpoint. There are obviously plenty of unhealthy obsessions out there. But if you are obsessed with like the idea that you're trying to like be, live your best life and be healthy, right? That's a very positive thing. Now, it can result in negative actions, people who maybe check their weight 2 or 3 times a day. And if that sort of causes you to like spiral, that can be like a sign of like disordered eating, which is obviously going way too far down the obsession trail until eventually it becomes an unhealthy obsession. That's definitely something we're trying to avoid, right? But we can help our clients sort of, develop these healthy obsessions through goal setting, right? Having a long-term goal is really fun. Stress management can be really, really helpful. Like if you know that certain things cause you to get stressed and that causes you to step off a path, developing that obsession can sometimes allow you to go, okay, I know this is hard. I know that I'm stressed, but the gratification that I'm going to get at the end of this is going to be greater than the discomfort that I'm feeling right now, right? That's sort of what we mean when we look at stress management. We'll see, like I said, self-monitoring is another one. We know that like journaling, for instance, is a really great way to sort of reduce stress and have really positive impacts in a lot of ways, increase conscientiousness. And sometimes like motivational interviewing. Now, motivational interviewing is often something you can do for yourself. Like if you just take the second to go, why do I really want to do this? And then you sort of, have like a little, and it's like, I don't know, me. It's like, no, what I mean, well, let's talk about it. Like, don't go crazy doing that. But that's oftentimes motivational interviewing is actually where a trainer will talk to their client and try to get to the heart of what your client's actually, trying to achieve. So self-monitoring, like I said, probably our favorite tool is a systematic observation of target behaviors and then recording that, right? Workout logs, food journals. Guys, everybody should be using a workout journal. I am obsessed with workout journals. You can get them on Amazon for like $12. And it tracks like your weight in set 1, your weight in set 2, right? You can put your number of reps down. Me personally, I divide it into my target weight and my target reps, and then whether or not I actually hit those things. And then that way I'm like, I never have this moment where I go into the gym, I'm like, I killed it today. Man, I was feeling really strong. And then I look back in my journal and realize that I was lifting lighter weight, because I don't have my weights memorized. I don't keep that in my brain. I keep it in the journal, and so like that's a really great way to sort of develop that awareness. You're like, because that way you don't have like a bad workout where you go to the gym and kind of dog it, like you just kind of don't really like work as hard. We know that we need to work hard to experience change. So a journal is a really great way to develop that awareness. Same thing is true of food. You're like, oh, I don't have junk food that often. And then you flip back through the pages and you're like, oh my God, yes, I do. Self-monitoring increases that conscientiousness we're talking about. So there are a lot of different ways to sort of incorporate this. I got a kind of interesting, I have been trying to limit how often I show these videos, but I do have a NASM video here that NASM put out. I don't think they're that well acted, and so they're a little hard to watch sometimes. But this one's not so bad. This is a really good example of how to implement self-monitoring. But fair warning, these are definitely like NASM trainers that are trying to be actors. But it is an example like directly tied to what we're talking about here. So it does work.
As a fitness or wellness professional, it should be the goal to help the client to get to a point where they can sustain long-term behavior change. One of the key components in making this happen is the development of self-monitoring by the client. Self-monitoring is the systematic observation and recording of target behaviors. Self-monitoring provides feedback for the client while also teaching them the awareness they need in order to maintain the healthy behavior changes they have made. There are many techniques that can be utilized for self-monitoring. For example, phone and tablet apps are a quick and easily accessible way for clients to begin self-monitoring. This may be as simple as tracking nutrition and exercise in the notes section of a phone to utilizing a robust activity and nutrition tracking app. Another simple, effective, and popular self-monitoring technique is journaling. This practice puts the client's thoughts and actions right in front of them to see at any time. Journaling should be coached to be free-flowing and without pause, resembling a stream of consciousness writing. In the case of improving fitness or losing weight, journaling around actions related to these goals should be encouraged. Additionally, the client should journal about their experiences, thoughts, and feelings as they journey toward their success. The type of self-monitoring mechanisms implemented should be up to the client and coincide with their own comfort level. The important part of this process will be the consistency with which the client carries out the practice.
Okay, so I think it's definitely a little bit of a different way of presenting that information. But that is sort of what we mean when we say talk about journaling. So power lifters and Olympic weightlifters have actually started journaling more. They've looked at in the realm of sports and clinical sports psychology. They've started increasing the amount that people are going to journal, and they've noticed that it has resulted in increased performance in their lifts. And so now one of the things that I think is really fun is that you're seeing in workout journals pop up like more and more and more and more is like just a rating. You can give yourself a number on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever, of how you felt your workout went that day, or how you felt at the end of the set. And so you guys know the RPE scale is what we use to monitor the intensity of cardio sometimes. They've started using RPE scales in the realm of weightlifting, and it has been very, very popular. It's like, this should feel like a 7 out of 10, which means that it should be tough, but you should feel like, refreshed and energized afterwards, not a 10 out of 10 where it feels like as difficult as possible and you're walking out of the gym completely exhausted. So love self-monitoring as a tool. Not only has it been shown to decrease mental problems like depression, and like it can improve like mood. It has actually been shown to increase the physical feelings of pain as well. Questions on that, guys? How we doing?
Doing good.
Love that. Nobody's got anything? All right. So next one we get to talk about is my favorite part of the day, which is problem solving. I love talking about problem solving. I think problem solving is an art form, and something that we can all sort of get better and better at over time. But problem solving is a method for overcoming negative behaviors, negative thoughts, negative feelings, and the associations with them, right? So a problem is like a dilemma that somebody might have that doesn't have like an instant sort of immediate solution. And so when we sort of take ourselves through like a specific way to like solve problems, we enhance our ability to overcome these problems, right? We get better, and that's what's so cool about problem solving. The more you do it, the better you get at sort of the art of it, right? And so they're going to break it down into 5 steps here. You guys have heard me talk about this before. I love to break it down into 3 steps, which is a little bit more basic, where identify the problem, solve the problem, and then implement that freaking solution. There's a little bit more detailed. So step 1, you're going to set the problem. Again, this is like recognizing that a problem exists and also recognizing that you have the power to solve it. If you've ever seen a movie or TV or known somebody who's gone through like AA, like Alcoholics Anonymous, they do a really great job. Like they always start at the beginning by recognizing that this is a problem and recognizing that they have the power to settle it by admitting that there's a problem, right? Like a lot of people they don't recognize that like they have an issue. A friend of mine, for instance, was struggling with addiction, and he was like, oh, it's just not that big a deal. I only do it on the weekends. And it's like, yeah, but those weekends are very destructive, and you spend the rest of the week like dealing with the fallout. Like you're not getting any better, right? And he's like, oh, I could, he could explain away in a lot of ways like his problems. It's like, nah, it's not that big a deal because of this, or it's not this big a deal. It's like, but it is a big deal. Like it's stopping you in a lot of different ways. And so what sort of started him on his journey to recovery was like recognizing that it was a problem, right? And recognizing that he can make a change. A lot of times people go, oh, well, I just, everyone in my family is really large, and so I'm always going to struggle with my weight. Right. That is recognizing that you don't have the tools necessary to solve the problem. So a lot of times the journey starts with saying like, no, I can do this. Right. And developing that belief that any problem can be solved. Right. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to get a really clear definition of what the problem is. This involves like separating relevant information from irrelevant information. So like somebody saying, again, like somebody who, let's say, struggles with their body weight, for instance, right? They might say something like, oh, well, I have a very sedentary job, and everybody who has a sedentary job, struggles with their weight. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily true, right? Like that's, your job is relevant to the problem, but it's irrelevant to, it's not the only cause of your problem, right? So we're trying to get a really clear definition here, right? The real issue is we go back, we boil it down a little bit more simple. The issue is that like a sedentary lifestyle, right? So is it possible for you to, to get up and walk around? then the whole being sedentary during the job portion becomes irrelevant, because you can start taking the stairs. That's not the only thing, right? Like that's the problem definition part. We want to get rid of all the irrelevant information, right? I, this is going to sound like so harsh and stuff. And I know we've all done this, but like, I always get kind of annoyed when my clients show up late. And like, it's, traffic happens, you know what I mean? Like we live in LA, people are going to be late every now and then. Everyone's human, but I do get really annoyed. I think you guys will probably agree with me on this, when someone's late for something, but they walk in holding like Starbucks or something like that. That kind of drives me a little crazy. And it's like, it's like, oh, sorry, I'm late. Traffic was crazy. The Starbucks was really slow, and it's like, those things are, like if traffic was so slow, maybe you sacrifice the Starbucks, like, and if that's truly not an option, then hey, it is relevant information, but a lot of times it's not. Again, I've talked about this person before, and I'm going to keep this person to remain like anonymous, but one of these people that I play Frisbee with, it just drives me crazy. One of the reasons why like I would never train this person, and they asked, they asked, and I told you guys the reason I would never train this person is because like I don't firmly believe that I think they can get to, I believe that anybody has the capacity to change. But I do know that like the journey for this person is just going to be really long. This person I've not seen them show up on, I'm not exaggerating here at all, by the way. I have not seen them show up on time for either of the games that I go to with this person in probably over a year. I have not seen this person be early or show up on time in over a year. And I see them twice a week. That's insane. And there was at one point where like, they were trying to come on the field, and they always unbalance teams whenever they show up, and they screw up our game. And recently it was like really bad. It was in a game where you bring a light or a dark jersey, and like this person like put on a light, and I was like, oh no, we need you over on dark, because we were like dominating, and I was like, they'll weigh the team down a little bit. And they're like, and so like they switched for a second. But there was a little bit of a miscommunication. Like some people didn't know whether they were going on or off the field. So then they switched again and just went over to the other side. And I was like, what are you doing? And then like, and this person goes, well, I showed up late and I really want to play. And my brain could not understand that sentence. I was like, you mean you showed up late, but you want to play? I was like, what? You don't get both. Like, not and, but. You're making your lateness our problem. And I went crazy. And again, like this person approaches me all the time for like training tips, and I just can't have the conversation with them. Because it always inevitably leads to conversations like this, where I'm like, you're never going to be able to like go to the gym regularly or work on your diet if you don't fix these things that you do, these habits that you have. And so like, they're like, oh no, I'm always late. And it's like, that's irrelevant information. It's like, you're late because your life is structured in a way to make you late. You're not setting alarms. You're not, this game is at the same time every week. So this person has a very unclear definition, or has a lot of irrelevant information to explain. It's a lot of excuses. That's really what it comes down to, right? A lot of times, like people will have a million excuses for why their behaviors are a certain way, and 90% of those reasons are irrelevant. Some of them are legitimate, like for sure, absolutely. Look, somebody's got like a really like stressful job, you have to pay your bills, right? And so if that explains like why you can't like come to the gym regularly, absolutely, I 100% agree, because going to the gym can take time. It does not mean though that you can't get into good shape and keep yourself healthy. There are still plenty of ways that are time efficient for anyone working even 60 hours a week, to find that time to get in. You just need to find the right like motivation, the right tools, and the right strategies, which is where if we have a very clear definition of the problem, now we can move into step 3, which is listing potential solutions. Now, this step, don't judge your solutions, guys, right? Like just lay out as many as you can, right? If your problem is with like having enough money to pay your bills, right? That's like the problem that you have. Step 1, recognize that it's like, woof, I'm just not, being able to pay my bills consistently, get all the irrelevant information out of there. One of the alternatives literally could be, okay, well, I'm going to win the lottery. I don't think that's a good solution because I think statistically it's really low. If you want to play the lottery for fun, great. I fully support you. As an investment strategy, I think that can be tough. But we don't make that decision first, right? In the beginning, it's actually really valuable when you're going through problem solving to just throw everything at the wall, right? Like your solution is like, well, I'm gonna meet a famous celebrity and marry them, and then I'll have, like, sure, yeah, we can use that as a solution. Lay them all out. Don't judge them. Okay, list any potential solutions you've got. Just throw everything at the wall. Because what'll happen is it gets the creative juices flowing, and then eventually we'll find the thing that sticks. I always try to encourage this in my clients, where like we'll sit down and be like, "What if we did this?" To get you to be more active or to retool your diet. And they'll go, yeah, but I don't really. It's like, okay, that's fine. It's going to make the list for now. We'll eliminate it later. Is what that's like. That's like the sentence I always use. We're gonna put it on the list now. We'll eliminate it later. And that is the generating alternatives. Don't judge your alternatives, guys. When you're trying to like solve problems, just lay them all out in the beginning. Then step 4, yeah, choose the best strategy. The lottery, maybe not. But maybe if you want to make like a little bit more money each week, I personally really don't like working on the weekends. Saturdays and Sundays are my time for me, but I do also play in my game every Saturday. And I don't really do anything in, the game's at 11. I don't really do anything in the first couple hours that like lead up to that. So from like 8 to 11, 7 to 11, I'm not really doing anything. And so I did start taking on like a couple clients in those hours because I don't have to be on my Zoom call. I don't have to like, this is all just extra income and I don't spend a dime of that. So, it all goes directly into like a savings account that I don't use in I'm going to go into a savings account. It goes into the stock market, but like it is my version of a savings account, I guess. And that's what that is. That's what that time is for. So at first, if somebody says like, well, what if you worked on the weekends to make more money? If I judged that alternative right away, I would have eliminated it. But because I kept it on the list, I realized like, actually, I don't mind working a little bit before my game because I'm always like just kind of waiting around for my game to start because it's kind of in an awkward time in the morning. So now, like, it turns out by having this thing that I thought was kind of a crappy strategy, ends up being great. And so, like, now I'm pulling in an extra like $200 a week in this time that like I wasn't doing anything with. Awesome, and then step 3 is verification. You're gonna try out the solution, track your progress, see if it works. Track it over a day, track it over a week, track it over a month, see what's going to work. So we start by recognizing that a problem exists and getting a very clear definition, get rid of any of the irrelevant information. After that, right, get rid of reasons or excuses that might be holding you back. Come up with a list of solutions. Don't judge them, just throw anything at the wall. Then judge them once you've kind of laid them all out. And lastly, start trying it out, right? Again, if you want to boil this problem solving method down and make it a little bit more simplified, identify the problem accurately first. So you can put steps 1 and 2 together. Get a very clear definition and of what the problem is, admit the problem exists and define it, separate any of that irrelevant stuff that doesn't matter. Step 2, come up with a solution, right? And that can be, generate some solutions and then pick the good one. And then step 3, verify it. Just start implementing it, right? Just like us as personal trainers, right? Somebody comes to me, they're like, I got shoulder pain, right? Great, let's go do a push-pull assessment. Let's go do an overhead squat. Overhead squat, their arms fall forward. Push-pull, their shoulders elevate, right? So now I know that it's like, hey, step one, I've sort of identified the problem, right? And it's like chances are what's tight is here in your traps and in your lats. Both of those things are causing like internal rotation of your shoulders. We need more external rotation. So here's a program. I want you to do some wall angels. I want you to do some stability ball lat stretches. And I want you to do like a trapezius stretch, pull your head over to the side. That's what you're going to warm up with every single workout. Then I want you to do some cable external rotations. I want you to do some bent over YTAs. And I want you to do some like bent over rows. And those three things are going to sort of fix this issue, right? Hopefully. I'm going to verify it. We're going to train it. We're going to track the progress over a couple of weeks. If it works, great. Aches and pains go away. Let's move on to the next problem, right? If not, let's go back and take a look at their posture. Let's take a look at their form, see if they're actually engaging in this properly. And it's like, oh, I see. So that is not quite the angle I was looking for on the YTA. Let's make this adjustment. I'm going to model for them, show them how to do it. Try it out again for another couple of weeks, right? So this is a constant process when it comes to like problem solving, right? You give somebody, let's say you sit down with somebody and they've got their target calories. You create like a diet, you work with them to create like a diet plan, right? You start implementing it and then check in every week to see how it's going. All of a sudden, you notice that their progress isn't where it's supposed to be. Let's take a look at the food journal. We notice that's like, they're just not sticking to the plan. Ask your client, hey, what's going on? Why aren't we sticking to this plan? And they're like, it's really hard. I get really stressed at work. And then I just find that like, I don't have time to do the meal prep. Okay, great. Yeah. Let's go back. Let's come up with some new strategies, right? We go back to the solving of the problem, right? We go back to that middle step. All right. So, God dang it, John's not here. He would have been the perfect example for this. We're like, hey, you couldn't, the diet plan was too hard to stick to. What about like a meal delivery service, or what about going and picking up some like pre-made healthy meals? John's been going to every table lately, and he's really into it. That's great. There we go. That's a really kind of good strategy there. So I love problem solving. It's probably one of my favorite things to do with my clients. I always try to remind myself of this three-step process, like where I am in it, rather than just taking my client through things and just making suggestions all the time. I think that's what a lot of trainers do. I think that's the classic approach to things. You're like, let's try this, right? But doing that work beforehand and getting a clear definition of things, it's a big sort of step in the process, right? And then generating as many alternatives as possible, just throwing everything at the wall. Let's see what sticks, All right, so we're going to move into a different section. But first, any questions on the problem solving stuff, guys? Everybody like that? That's literally my favorite part. Questions, comments?
No, thank you.
No.
Oh, good. Fair enough. All righty. If anybody ever wants advice on the problem solving thing, I'm certainly not an expert, but I am passionate. All right. So let's talk a little bit about stress. So stress is, honestly, it goes right back to the same conversation. Dion, if I remember right, I think it was like the first mod you were coming in. And we talked really briefly in like our physiology class about like neurology. I think you were a big fan of this stuff. I always think that stress is related to that. I think if you're going to talk about neurology, I think that stress is part of the same conversation. It's really fascinating to look at how stress sort of affects our brain. What sucks about like being a stressed person is that like you get stressed, which causes you to feel negative emotions. Your brain had to make that stress and it had to make those negative emotions. So now, guess what? You're better at getting stressed and you are better at making negative emotions. That sucks. Which is one of the reasons why meditation, journaling, again, stress management techniques are really effective at helping. Me personally, I don't love to meditate, at least not in the traditional sense. I don't see myself as a very a very relaxed person. I don't like, it's just not stuff I really take time to do. I'm not a creature of comfort. My girlfriend absolutely is, like she'll take a hot bath and use like a bath bomb and stuff. I cannot imagine doing that. Like people talk about like getting in a hot tub because it's so relaxing. It's like I sit in a hot tub and I'm like, this is fine, I guess. Yeah, like I'm just not one for relaxing. Uh Luckily it doesn't seem to affect me too negatively, at least I hope. um but I have other ways that I sort of release like tension and stuff, going for a run, like exercising, being physically active. And then also even just like having zone out time. I respond really well when I just get a little bit of time to myself to read. If I can read, all my cares go away. I get wrapped up in a good book. It'll de-stress me out of nowhere, even an article sometimes. I can just like take the time to like open up Facebook, scroll around, find something that I think is fascinating, and be like, oh, a little climate article. Click it. Totally great way for me to relax. Everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have their own sort of version of meditation. But meditation, I even though I'm not like a practicer, I am a firm believer in its benefits. If you find that you are a very stressed person, if you find you have a very stressed client, working with that client and identifying ways that they can sort of relieve that stress, recognizing that freaking exercise is one of the best ways to do that, is really great. I have, just like anybody else, I know that you guys have done this. You've had that day where you're like, oh, I gotta go to the stupid gym. I gotta go do my stupid workouts. Like, oh, it's been a rough day. I just don't want to go. Right. But you somehow drag yourself out the door against all odds. You get to the gym, you walk in, your warm up sucks, your cardio sucks, you just feel bad. Your first set sucks, and then your second set comes along, you're like, all right, that felt a little bit better. Yeah. And then like your third set, and then all of a sudden you're in the zone and you feel great leaving the gym. Maybe that stress returns a little bit later after you start to kind of, the further you drive away, the more maybe some stress sort of starts creeping back in, but you experience that relief. I have definitely, some of my best workouts that I've ever had have been days that I did not want to go to the gym and was just stressed and annoyed. I totally value, I'll have clients that come in and they're like, I had a rough night last night. My wife got food poisoning and I do not feel good myself, but I'm here. Let's do this, like, and it's like, woof, all right. And let's do a gentle workout and they'll leave feeling great. And it's like, hey, I know physically you feel really good right now. We get to release some endorphins while you're working out. Take the moment right now, recognize the fact that like you pushed through like a really hard experience. Reward yourself mentally for a second and say like, I'm awesome because you got through this like big rough moment. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's simple. It's just taking a moment to pat yourself on the back and be like, I'm awesome. I always make this joke and I use it as a motivating tool. I know it's goofy. I know it's kitschy and silly and jokey, but like when I have my clients do burpees, I always make them do the clap at the top because it's a self five. Self five. I'm awesome. Like, say it in your head. I know it's cheesy. I know it's dorky. I promise you it has positive benefits though. It can help with stress. So when we are sort of dealing with the stress situation, right? First thing you want to do is recognize what your stressors are. There's a lot of them out there, right? Changing jobs can be stressful, moving, a conflict in a relationship, the death of a loved one or illness or injury of a loved one. Good Lord, that's one of the most stressful events that can happen. All of those things are major stressors that can feel like they completely derail your life. I have definitely had that myself. I don't talk about this too often, but my brother was killed in a workplace accident, and I was in school at the time, and it like wrecked me emotionally. And like whenever something like that happens, my emotional response to that at that time in my life was to just lock myself in my room for a couple days and just find a way to kind of deal with it myself and not like socially interact with anyone and just be alone. So like didn't go to school for like, didn't leave my room for like 4 days, um, not the healthiest way to deal with things, but that is like what I did back in the day. That used to be sort of my approach to things. And it's stress, right? But I found that the day and what helped me realize something, the day that so I live with 2 roommates at the time, and we would do like morning breakfast as like a dorky thing. And one of the other things that we would do that is a majorly dorky thing is we would have grilled cheese Tuesdays. So Tuesday rolls around, and I like my roommates were like, "Hey man, like we haven't seen you in like 4 days. We'd love to have you for it's grilled cheese Tuesday." That was a really big moment for me in my life because it helped me realize that when I can return to a sense of like normalcy and do something in my life that is similar to like how my life was before, it made me feel like I had control again. And it was like what got me out of bed. It's what got me back to like living my life. Um, Same thing is true of your clients, right? They have like a major stress. Going to the gym can be a majorly great anchor for one of your clients. And I love to encourage that in my clients, right? If you have like some major stressor in your life that's like holding you back, and you can just walk through the gym door regularly at the same time, do the same style of warm up, it has tremendous effects, guys. And I always try to encourage that consistency in my clients, because even if you feel, let's say you lose your job, you feel like you have like a loss of your like there's no sense in the world. If you can go do this thing that you consistently do, that you're good at, and recognize that like you can return to this routine, it can really have a positive benefit. And the same thing is true on like a smaller scale. That's like a major life-changing scale. It's also true of the daily hassles of life. You misplace your keys, man. When I lose my keys, I go crazy. I'm like, where are they? Because I don't usually lose stuff. I'm pretty like, when I do, I go nuts. Like I know right now my keys are on the mantle downstairs because I left them before I went to vacation. And if they are not there, I'm gonna lose my mind. Traffic problems, that's one that makes me lose my mind. I become a crazy person. Being criticized for getting something, all these like stressors that you deal with, just taking a moment to do something that you're good at, taking a moment to do something that is normal and like a staple in your life, is one of the best ways to get over that. There's other techniques for dealing with stress as well. There is stress inoculation. Sometimes, guys, people are stressed out by going to the gym. Like it is not their happy place. It is their stressed place because maybe they were picked on at some point in their life. Maybe they just don't feel like they're good at things, right? So one of the things you can do is build like stress inoculation. It is literally a vaccine for stress. So you start to like do miniature versions of these things that kind of stress you out, start to develop that confidence, and you can sort of prevent that negative emotional attachment by being like, oh, this isn't as scary as I thought it was. This isn't as bad as I thought it was. Here's a fun one about like, here's something that like, here's a weird habit that I have. I hate getting my hair cut. It is a stressful thing for me, not because like I'm afraid of how the hair is going to turn out. I could not care if I tried about that. But like there's just something about waiting at a hair salon that I absolutely hate. You call to make the appointment, you show up, and you still just not ready to go at that appointment time. It drives me nuts. You have to drive and leave the house for this one little task and then go get a haircut and then come back. Drives me nuts. I don't know what it is. And it's just not something that I like doing. So what I've started doing is pairing it up with like a likely behavior of mine. And now I try to go on like the first Sunday of the month. It doesn't always happen. But I try to go on like the first Sunday of the month, which is like I grocery shop on Sundays, and there is a Supercuts, which is where I go because I don't care. Next to the Trader Joe's that I go to. So now I got this like new habit. I feel like much better about it, right? And so now it doesn't stress me out as much. Now that I've done that a little bit consistently, I've dipped my toe in the water, I'm kind of used to it. It doesn't freak me out as much, you know? That's stress inoculation. So it's going to start with like eliminating the fear of the unknown, usually like educating your client, showing them like, if they're nervous about getting on like an exercise routine, just showing them like, hey, I'm your trainer, I've got your back. Here's what your schedule is going to look like. This is what the day-to-day is going to look like. Here's what it's going to feel like. It's not as scary. It's not as intimidating as you think it is. That can be really helpful. And then coping self-statements is also really helpful for dealing with stress. Just taking that moment to say like, I've got this, I can do this, I got it. Those words, that language is huge. There is also, if you guys are interested in all this psychology, Dion, I feel like you'd be really into this actually. If you guys want to see a little bit more about how language can kind of affect our thoughts, if you ever want to read anything about what's called NLP, it stands for neuro linguistic programming. It's kind of the Tony Robbins thing. What's the one that I like? This one right here. NLP, The Essential Guide. I really love this book. It's an audiobook, by the way, or there is the audiobook. And it is all about like retooling the language that you use to say more positive things, not only about yourself, but about the choices that you make and in your life, and the situations that you are in. Love NLP because it's a really effective version. I think NLP pairs directly with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's all about restructuring your thoughts and being less negative and being more positive. For the record, I do think there's toxic positivity. Like you can just be like, oh, it's okay, everything's gonna be fine. That's not always helpful. But like learning how to like be realistic. It's like, oh, this sucks, but it's going to be okay. Right? That's realistic, but also like at least it's a little constructive, right? This is a rough moment in my life, but I will get through this because I've gotten through it before. That's how to use like neuro-linguistic programming in a very effective way. It's all about language. Really fascinating stuff, by the way. If you get a chance to read that, I highly, or watch a video on it. I really recommend it. It's just fascinating. All right, so obviously this isn't going to be overnight. None of these changes are going to be perfect the first time you try them. There's going to be, you're going to be on the problem solving train, and then you're going to goof up and fall back into old habits, right? That is where we look at like moving through the stages of change model, right? People are going to fall back. People are absolutely going to fall backwards in the stage in. They're going to go from pre-contemplation into preparation, into action, back into preparation. They're going to keep the gym membership, but they're going to stop going and they're not taking action anymore. Right? So there is sort of the difference here, right? Between a lapse and a relapse. So a lapse is a temporary misstep. Relapse is falling back into old habits. Our job 9 out of 10 times, guys, is to recognize when our client lapses and help them prevent it from becoming a relapse, right? So lapses happen, right? You're going to miss a gym appointment because you overslept. You're going to have a really stressful day, and you're just going to need to have you're going to need to go to the beach for the day. Like that's fine. Those things are actually okay. You can accept that, right? The problem is like letting the negative emotions that kind of come with that of like, oh, I should have done that. I should have done this. Oh, I'm not good at this. I'm worthless. All these like negative things. We got to keep that from happening, right? Like that's what we're trying to do. So first thing, accept that like, hey, this was not a target behavior. This isn't what I was trying to do. Why did this happen? So hit the replay button, take a look at it, and then go back through and like redo it. Like, what would I have done differently? Replay it with like the correct action, continue self-monitoring moving forward, and then like let it go. I'll have clients. Do you guys want to know the trick? If you ever are late for something, and you want to, if you're late for something and you show up in like a group of people, you know what the trick to getting those people to forgive you is? It is not to apologize over and over and over again and say, I'm sorry, I'm late, I'm sorry, I'm late, I'm sorry. Honestly, it's to not even bring it up because it's a minor event. The event that you are building in your head is probably a lot bigger than how they actually feel about it. If you goof up, you make a mistake of some type, apologize once, move on. I'm sure you guys have probably noticed from me, I'll do this every now and then. If I start class late or something, I will say like, I apologize, and I move on, because like we're not helping anyone by going, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, over and over and over and over again. That is not constructive. It's not helpful. You're not getting anywhere. So why take the time to do it? It's okay if your client like lapses, and you can explain that to them. It's like, look, you're going to miss a session here or there. You get a new client. They're like, no, I'm going to be here every time. It's like, look, you're going to go to McDonald's at some point, right? Like everybody falls off the wagon for a moment. The trick is to make sure that you are preventing it from becoming like a full-on relapse. So let's figure out like why we fell off the wagon and see if we can keep that from happening again. Accept it and move on. That's the rational approach to things, right? So speaking of rational, last little thing that is related to our emotions and feelings, we've got rational emotive therapy. This is just like neuro-linguistic programming, except that it looks a little bit more at like the problematic side of things. So rational emotive therapy is part of cognitive behavioral therapy. It looks at, recognizing that a lot of our beliefs, a lot of our automatic thoughts are pretty irrational. We tend to use the front part of our brain first before it gets to the back part of our brain. And this is where all of our major emotions are kept. This is where our more logical thinking is kept. So when you're like, you text a significant other, right? And you're maybe a little bit nervous, right? So somebody you're asking out on a date or something like that, right? You're talking to somebody on one of the apps, I don't know. You send it out, and then like, you're like, okay, how long would it take them to like read that and get back to me? Oh my God, it should have only taken 30 seconds. Why haven't they texted me? And all the emotions cause your brain to explode, that is the front of your brain. It is not irrational to believe that they could be in the shower, they could be, it is not unlikely that they just don't have their phone with them. Maybe they're watching an episode of something. Maybe their phone's on silent because they're in a meeting, right? Taking the moment to like recognize that is a very helpful tool that also takes practice and effort. So a lot of times people will have what are called automatic problem thoughts, or APTs. These are pervasive thoughts based on really extreme or absolute words. I tend to be a hyperbolic person. I tend to exaggerate a lot. I use really extreme language sometimes. That's fine as long as I'm not using it in like negative emotions, and as long as I'm not talking about myself that way, because that is how we start to develop automatic problem thoughts. I am terrible at this. I'm awful at this. I have to do this. I need to, these like really strong like versions of things, right? Tracking your automatic problem thoughts and learning how to turn those around into more rational versions of things is a really helpful tool that you should try to develop in your clients. We want to work with our clients to generate more constructive thoughts. So for instance, if somebody's like, oh, I'm just terrible at working out, or I hate working out. It's like, look, every creature on the planet is at least a little bit programmed to enjoy some version of physical activity. Do you hate the gym or do you hate exercise? It's like, well, I just only go to the gym. I got to park, I got to walk. Okay, great. So it's not fair to say that you hate working out. It is fair to say that you hate, dealing with traffic and these other things. So maybe we should find a different version of, different way to work out, a different way to be physically active. It doesn't always have to be in the gym. I don't like running on treadmills, but I love running outside. When I was living in Portland, my favorite thing was like put on my hoodie, put on a hat, put in my headphones, pouring down rain and go out for a run, love running in the rain. Other people, that is their biggest nightmare, and that's fine, right? Taking the moment to just recognize that like different strokes for different folks, recognize that like, We do have these sort of irrational beliefs that we're sort of stuck with, these automatically sort of problematic thoughts, right? So one of the ways that people will often like do this is they'll have these sort of like set irrational beliefs. One of the biggest one is like overgeneralizing, where they think everything is related to the one thing that they're working on, right? That's an example of like overgeneralization. Or another really big one is catastrophizing, right? Hard word to say, fun thing to understand. Catastrophizing is kind of what my mom does. We were at the airport yesterday, and the security took my dad took his phone and he threw it in his bag to very quickly be able to carry it, because he was putting his shoes back on, all that stuff. And he like we park it at this one place, like a few minutes later. We're all adjusting and getting everything ready, and my dad goes, "Where'd I put my phone?" And my mom goes, "Oh my god." she's like, "Where?" And she's freaking instantly. And I like look at her, I was like, "Mom, relax. It's in a bag. If it's not, we're gonna call it and we're gonna go back and we're gonna find it." That's like catastrophizing. My mom immediately was like, "If he doesn't have his phone, he can't make his phone calls for work. Can't make his phone calls for work. We won't be able to work. He can't work. Can't pay our bill. Like, and then we're gonna be homeless." Like mountains out of molehills. Like that is catastrophizing. I know that we all do this, right? I'm sure you guys are listening right now and being like, "Oh, I definitely did that recently," where it's like, that's a classic example of sort of an irrational belief, where it's like, I did this, I forgot this one thing, and now the whole world's going to blow up, right? No. I promise you, the world's going to keep moving, So sometimes you can have what are called schemas. These are very associated with our irrational beliefs. So if you have like an irrational belief that you're kind of stuck with, right? You are not good at exercise. You always eat unhealthy foods. You are never going to be able to quit smoking. You are bad at stuff, right? Those are all like pervasive irrational thoughts. Those are known as schemas, right? The big ones that we see most often, overgeneralization, right? I'm not good at basketball doesn't mean that I am a bad athlete, catastrophizing, right? I'm late this one time, and so I'm never going to be taken seriously ever again. Or just pervasive negative thinking in general. These are all examples of schemas. So just taking a moment to sort of pull back and turn your thoughts around, recognize that like, hey, that's a pretty irrational thought, can be a really good way to sort of pull back from that schema. So how do we use all of these techniques in the various stages of change? Well, we got a couple different ways that we're going to do this. Obviously, if we're looking at the SWIM model, remember we had goal setting, behavior, cognition, imagery, interpersonal. This one's pretty much all related to cognition. So when we're working with our clients, we are trying to help them restructure and come up with much more effective thoughts and emotions, right? If you have a client in the pre-contemplation stage, we're really just trying to get them to recognize that a problem exists. Remember, education is the best way to get somebody out of pre-contemplation. With an addict, the first thing they do is they admit that they have a problem, right? That's how we get. And again, you're not going to run into too many clients that are in pre-contemplation. But if you have an existing client that's hiring you to, get them in better shape, maybe they want to like do a powerlifting meet, and you take a look at the rest of their life, they're like, "I just want you to help me in the gym. What are some supplements that I can take? What's this? What's this?" And then they say something one day talking about how they never get enough sleep. And you're like, ooh, getting enough sleep is really important for recovery, especially as like a power lifter. If you're trying to increase like strength and muscle mass, you got to recover. You need to get your rest. So maybe we get them to recognize that it's an issue. They're like, I never get it. I'm always sleeping. I'm always getting 6 hours of sleep at night. It's like, yeah, biologically, like that's not. He's like, no, I feel fine. It's like, yes. Fun fact, by the way, guys, if you ever want to watch a video about sleep, there's an ASAP Science video that has a really good one. And it talks about how like one of the fun, evil things that your brain does, it will convince you that you got enough sleep. If you consistently don't get enough sleep, you will actually stop noticing that you feel differently. Your brain will trick you into thinking that's enough of sleep. But then you finally get like a good night's rest one day and you just feel like way better. Yeah, that's because you haven't been getting enough sleep. But your brain will sort of like, keep calm and carry on and try to just like make you feel a little bit better about that stuff. So telling somebody that, helping them recognize that can be an effective way to get a pre-contemplator to start thinking about it. It's like, look, I promise you need to get enough sleep. Help them recognize that problem exists. You get a client in the contemplation stage. You can help them sort of identify some of their negative thoughts or recognize some of their schemas that they might have. Or another really effective thing, my favorite, is to accurately define like this problem, right? Like, well, I don't get enough sleep because like, I can't fall asleep. And it's like, well, are you goofing around on your phone before you go to bed? Because like it could be that the blue light from your phone is telling your brain that it's noon and it's, your brain's going, oh, I'm supposed to be awake right now. So like, do you have insomnia? Or are you somebody who like uses their phone a little bit too much? You have a phone addiction, that's my problem. I know it is. That is why, I guess you can't see it next to the bed there. My girlfriend keeps her phone charger next to the bed. I keep mine here on the desk. And that's where my phone has to go when it's time for me to go to bed, because I will use it until I fall asleep, and that is not good. It will keep me awake. I did it the whole time while I was on vacation because I'm not in my bed. If you have somebody who's in the preparation stage, right, you can come up with those decisions, right? You can start trying out. It's like, okay, I'm gonna throw some stuff at the wall. Let's see what sticks, or teach your client how to combat some of those negative schemas. And that can be a really good way to get them into action. Once they start doing that, they're going to start engaging in this sort of regularly. So we can start verifying whether or not the problem solving methods are working. Did what we threw at the wall stick? Let's find out. Let's track the progress, right? Or they can check how they're moving. Maybe they see like how the exercise is going, right? Like, let's see if this program is increasing our mobility and flexibility and stuff. And then if they're in the maintenance stage, they're exercising regularly, they're working on all this stuff all the time. Now we can start to develop some resistance, right? So now it's like recognizing that this is where, like, again, Alcoholics Anonymous does this so well. Addiction centers understand this so very well. But one of the best ways to keep somebody to develop that resilience is actually to have them help someone else. So they'll become like a sponsor. And that makes it much easier. They can both sort of feed off of each other, help each other. But it also ensures that like they don't have time to fall back into old habits. So hopefully you found that one interesting. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a really interesting realm of psychiatry because it is all the intangible, it's the stuff we can't touch. It's all about our thoughts. It's all about our emotions. But it is very much approach from the same scientific methods that we use in very objective stuff. This is what we call a soft science, not to say that means it's a fake science. It just means that like we measure it without numbers. We can still measure progress this way, and it is sort of a fascinating area. That's it today, guys. Questions or comments? How you feeling?
Feeling good.
Cool.
Good.
Yeah, feeling good. I just question. So we only meeting one time, right? This
Yes.
This period. Okay. The idea in I think 16 or
I think Tuesday the 15th, right?
15. Okay, great. Got it. Yeah.
I believe it's Tuesday. Let me check the email just so I don't lie to you.
Okay, no worries. No, yeah, I got the email. I just like just double check. I remember.
Day 3, day 2, day 1. Where is it? There it is. Yeah, 15. Tuesday the 15th, 9 a.m. / 6 p.m.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
All right.
All right, bro.
Cool,
Thank you.
guys.
All right, bye, guys. All right.
Alrighty, thank you.